Joining me live now is Dr Matthew Sussex with the Centre for Defence Research and ANU Strategic and Defence Studies Centre. Thanks for your time. This has taken a lot of people by surprise. How did this really successful counteroffensive come to be?
Yeah, well, for about a month and a half, the Ukrainian armed forces have been kind of signalling that they were going to mount a counter-offensive out of the southeast of Ukraine. And the Russians pivoted a bunch of people and resources to try and block that. Now, what really happened is that the Ukrainians counterattacked out of the northeast, and that was fairly thinly defended. A lot of the Russians there were sort of local Donetsk militia people, and the Ukrainians broke through quite stunningly, so that the Russian forces, although the state media in Moscow says they were regrouping, they were really, retreating in a bit of disarray, and they've left behind a large amount of weapons and ammunition for the Ukrainian forces. As your report says, about 6,000 square kilometres. So it's a sizable victory for the Ukrainians.
Given the fact, as you mentioned there, does it hint that Russia can respond through the rest of the country, that this won't become Ukraine taking back large parts of its overall territory, spreading down to the south? Is that more difficult?
Yeah, it's much more difficult, and you would probably anticipate that the Ukrainian advance would slow down a bit. And that's for obvious reasons, that they have to secure the territories that they've recaptured from the Russians. It also is reflective of the fact that the Russians still have a large force there and have drafted something like another 137,000 people. So this is an important battle, but it's certainly not the end of the war.
And I guess, though, it does point to the fact that Russia's going to struggle to not only reverse this, but, get back to Kyiv, which it wanted to originally. You've outlined options for Vladimir Putin. They include just settling for some sort of peace and maybe giving back some of the territory but holding onto the Donbass. That seems very unlikely because it'd be a big back down. Another option, trying to re-establish the long and grinding campaign. Now, this is the issue, isn't it? Russia's so big and Vladimir Putin doesn't care what this costs, that this will eventually become hard for Ukraine. They've been so stoic, but, Ukrainian people, there's still a limit to how much they can put up with, surely.
Yeah, I mean, look, Russia can probably carry on the conflict for around about 12 months. And, Putin can perhaps issue a general mobilization order that gets an unlimited supply of people to the front. The question is, though, what he actually equips them with. Because although Russian war stocks are pretty, decent, they're now using artillery shells from the North Koreans. So while Russia, has the upper hand in terms of people, it may not have the upper hand in the end in terms of the ability to inflict damage on the Ukrainians. And I think Putin's calculation is probably, let's try and drag it out for as long as possible, because then he gets to test to see whether his energy weapon, gas embargoes against European Union states, prompt those countries to flag and fragment in their support of Ukraine.
And so their crucial support being weaponry, and whether that's his final, perhaps, move to actually gain the ascendancy again. Okay, so you mentioned a third option, which sort of is a whole grab bag of what you call escalation. It goes from another invasion elsewhere within Europe, also talking about full-scale mobilisation rather than the shadow war so far, or even going nuclear. What's most likely to happen, do you think?
Look, in the short term, I think Putin will try and shift it back to this sort of grinding campaign. He has escalated already by targeting power stations in Ukraine to punish the Ukrainians for making advances. There are, suggestions, hints that have been made by Russian state media about potential radiological accident at a nuclear plant. That, of course, would be a very risky thing to do, and I don't think anyone would buy an attempt to blame it on the Ukrainians. The issue of will Russia use tactical nuclear weapons is one that's also gets brought up a lot. And frankly, I think that the likelihood of that is fairly low, but can't be discounted. Militarily, it's of virtually no value whatsoever. In order to punch holes in the Ukrainian lines, because they're spread out, you're going to need to use quite a lot of tactical nuclear weapons. And if Putin crosses that line, then it'll make it really hard for countries like China to continue to at least rhetorically support him.
Yeah, and economically as well, crucially. Matthew Sussex, great to get your thoughts today on another fascinating period in what's a pretty awful situation, but the stoicism of Ukraine still confounds the Russians. Thank you.